Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much, Ryan, for inviting me here. Really appreciate it. This is the first time that I'm giving a talk here at Baltimore. So just a quick introduction about myself. I won't spend too much time on that because I want to get to the fun stuff. I know I've been given an hour, but I usually try not to bore people for an hour. I say that I used to be a professor in my past life, so you know, a mic and a professor, it's a lethal combination. So you don't want to be stuck with me for the next 1 hour. All right, so what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about, of course, I'll introduce myself. I'll talk about our game Mystic, but it's not as much about the game, it's more about what needs to be done when you are deciding to make your own game studio, or even if it's not a full-blown game studio, but what game you're trying to make. What are the things that you need to be aware of? So I'll be talking about that. And then, you know, what strategy we used for marketing, what we learned. So a lot of this, like 2, 3, 4, will contain tidbits about what we learned along the way. So intro. So this is a very first image that, you know, again, AI generated when I had the idea of the game. Like, this is what we're trying to do. So who am I? My name is Sajid Farooq. My PhD was in computer graphics. I've worked, as I said, in academia. I was a professor of graphics and games at Champlain and different universities. And I was also in the industry, so I was leading DirectX at Microsoft. I'm a contributor to Unreal Engine. I worked on the HoloLens 2. I also worked on the Omniverse. I led the team that developed it from the Nike side. I was the director of innovation at Nike, especially doing some three-dimensional rendering stuff. And then I was VP at Edgelord, virtual production / modern AI-driven filmmaking company that is owned by Harmony Kern. So interesting experience, that last one, as you can imagine. So when I set out to make a game, right? So first of all, let me just, obviously, before talking about how we got to this, let me just share what the game is. So the game Mystic is a survival game. It's an action survival game. It's set in the Middle East, and it's about the battle between Jinn and human beings. So a lot of spiritualism there, maybe a bit of horror there, and it combines a couple of different genres, especially survival craft genre, then with the action. And you'll see a bit of parkour, so a bit of everything thrown in there, but we'll talk about why we did it that way. So it's going to be out on early access on the 25th of October. There's a demo already out that you can play. We're going to be part of Steam Next Fest. And I'll show you a trailer, and then I'll get to the meat of the presentation. So let me just quickly share a trailer. I don't know if the sound is good. So this is pretty old footage, but still, it should give you an idea of what the game is about. Alright, so that was the game and what we've been working on. So let me get to the meat of the presentation, which is the market research. So a lot of you, when you're when people are starting off making a game or they have an idea, usually they're very similar to me 20 years ago. Like, yeah, I have this idea, I love it, I think it's going to make $1 million, you know, I think. Or most people don't even talk about the money aspect. It's just like, I think it's an amazing game. Oh yeah, my mom loved it. My brother loved it, so everybody's gonna love it. And unfortunately, it doesn't turn out that way because there are some forces, which are beyond just the creative forces. So what are those things? And again, having worked at both indie companies and Fortune 50s, those are the sort of things that you begin to learn. So understanding the data, where it is, what you find, how to interpret it, those are all very, very important aspects. So there are two different things that we start off with trying to understand. One is the most important question: what kind of game do I want to make? And again, you could potentially say, well, this is the type of game that I enjoy, therefore I'm going to make this game. Valid, not invalid, but there are going to be certain types of games that if you're making, they're going to not make business sense. At the end of the day, if your goal is just to make a great game and, even if 2 people play it, they enjoy it, that's good, that's fine, nothing wrong with that. But this presentation is more about making a game that you can actually survive off of, that you can make money off of. So my own experience with this, again, comes from having done a lot of market research, again for DirectX, looking at a lot of different numbers. When I was creating the product roadmap of where DirectX would really love, which features it should have, and talking to NVIDIA and all of these companies trying to understand. But it's also at, again, at Nike, but then also at Edgelord, where we managed to do a multi-million raise in about just a couple of weeks based on this sort of plan where we looked at the data and said, okay, look, this sort of thing makes sense financially and you should invest in it. So I was lucky enough to be able to be a key part of that raise based on the slide that we made. Then I think just a month or 2 after that we did another raise. So that is where this learning is coming from. So the first thing, as I said, is the game. And the second thing that we want to try to understand is the audience. So who are you making the game for? So what type of game and who are you making the game for? I'm not going to talk too much about the audience. That you'll find like a lot of information about. I think what doesn't get talked about as much is what type of game. You just hear a bit like, oh, nowadays this type of game is in vogue, or that type of game is in vogue. Let's just make that, there's a bandwagon effect. But let's look at the actual numbers. So when it comes to actually looking at numbers, what I found is most people tend to try to find the numbers that support what they already have in mind, right? So like, I want to make this type of game, let me go to, and then usually what they'll do is they'll do a quick Google search. Well, I'm old school, but nowadays it's probably ChatGPT, right? So you're probably just going to ask Gemini or ChatGPT and go like, yeah, why do you think this type of game is going to be successful? And ChatGPT loves to pat you on the back and say, oh, it's going to be great because, and it's just going to constantly say good things. And so even the source of information, most people is just standard Google. What you don't realize is that there are actually subscriptions and there are actually places that you can get information for very, very small sums, and that information is so much better than just doing a random Google search. So just to give you an idea, how do I even answer this question, what type of game, right? If I look at the general stats, and I'll show you how I got to these in a second, right? This is the games market, and this, by the way, is for Steam, because Steam's data is the most accessible, right? There are slight variations in how exactly that data is achieved. However, if you look at multiple different sources, you can get an average, and they're pretty good, right? So it's very interesting, very depressing, these numbers. So if you look at it, you'll see that the top 1% games make about 5 million over their lifetime, right? That's top 1% games overall. Top 5% make 500,000. Top quartile make 10,000, right? And then the median. So don't look at the average because it's skewed, as you can see. But look at the median. So the median is 1,200. This data might be slightly older, so I'll share the data too, right? But that high over there is very, very important. So this is what it looks like overall. What I want to do is, and this talk is more dynamic. Oh, by the way, because it's a very practical talk and I'm going to be showing stuff, feel free to ask questions at any time. You don't need to wait until the end. If you have questions, it's supposed to be an interactive thing, so feel free to ask So before diving into this, what we were doing was very similar, right? All right. So this is what we were doing. So what we were doing was very similar to what everybody else does. Okay, we want to make a game that is narrative-driven game. We love narratives, so therefore we're going to look at all the other games that are narrative games, and we're going to try to spruce up the numbers, go to investors and say, yeah, there's a lot of money in there, right? And we ran into a problem right away. Like, okay, sure. So a lot of these games, like, what do you exactly mean by narrative game? Is it an action adventure? That's also narrative. Is it graphic adventure? Is it a novel? Is it episodic? It becomes like a nightmare. And then there's the release dates, like some of the most famous were created way back in 2010, some are latest. And then the biggest problem was that there's no clear numbers. So we had to go through each one, like this sheet took us, I don't know, a week or two. This is old information, so I'm blanking on exactly what. But this took a lot of time. So we said, oh, these are the main studios, this is how much they're making. And all of these numbers are sort of just found from somewhere, rather than being actual numbers that we can rely on, right? And then, you know, we sort of tried to look at PlayStation, we tried to look at the Switch, and we tried to look at some of these other ones, and it's pretty difficult. So, I'm not sure why it is. Yes.
Is all the revenue numbers you have of your lifetime revenue, or is it like just the past year?
That's a good question. We're going to get into that. That's a great question, right? So then we looked at, okay, fine. We can't really figure out, this is all too much data all over the place. So let's look at a game that we think we can achieve, because you're looking at Quantum Dreams game like Quantum Break, Quantum Break game, and you're like, I love that game, but I won't be able to make that with my small dinky team of 20 people, 10 people, 5 people, right? So we looked at Hellblade, we're like, okay, what if we took Hellblade and removed all the cinematics? Could we make something of that fidelity? Yeah, we have the team. Okay, let's look at the numbers, let's look at, still not quite getting what we're looking for, right? So those were not really where we wanted to go. So that's where we started looking at these subscriptions, and you know, so the first one that comes up is Gamedev. And Gamedev is really, really good. There's Gamedev, there's VG Insights. Both of them are very cheap. I believe they're like $25 a month or something. You just need it for a month or two, pay those $25, and then, you know, the information that you get out of it is gold. It's amazing. Because it does all of this for you that you normally would have had to do yourself, right? So let's look at the numbers. So this is, again, from Steam. Nowadays, I believe VG Insights also gives you numbers for Xbox and PlayStation. So very important. And there are a couple of other features that it gives you too. But this is very interesting. I want you to look at this number and sort of go, what were we thinking when we were deciding what sort of game to make? So again, very sobering numbers. Yes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
These numbers, how's the methodology behind it, and behind what the information that this is showing?
So this one, if you go to Gamedev, I'm trying to find out where, but there's actually a section where they explain exactly the methodology. So all of this data is through an API that goes to Steam directly, and they obtain it. But because there are certain things that Steam doesn't tell you, some of those numbers are extrapolations, right? Or interpolations. But the way to fix that is you use this alongside with another one like VGI, and you average the numbers, and that gives you a pretty good idea of something that is most likely to be true.
Is it public information,
Yeah.
or is it company provided?
Which
like
one?
The data, like the data behind.
Through Steam. So it's officially through Steam. So this is officially the Steam API. They use the Steam API. So yes, it is public information that comes from Steam. So there are, I believe, if I remember correctly, there are some numbers. Like for example, you might know, like people tell you, you should get this many wish lists in order to get this much revenue. So there are some metrics, and I think they also come out of things like these where people have done the stats. But yeah, all of this comes from public data. None of this, if I'm not mistaken, none of this is private. which is why you're seeing Steam data the most. Xbox, of course, I work there. It's very private, so I have no idea how they, VG Insights managed to get that data. Seemingly they got it recently, but I wouldn't be surprised if they paid both Microsoft and Sony to get that data. But that is like very detailed data. So yeah. So what's interesting here, as I said, is that so look at this one, the dark blue one. So 55.3% make less than $1,000. That's very, very sobering. So over half of your games that come out do not even make $1,000, right? And then you can obviously look at a whole bunch of other things, like for example this one, a great stat right here, right? So if it shows me, so basically 25% of your games make almost no money whatsoever, right? They're making like almost no money. So all of these are not making any money. It's only when you get to this where you start to see that hockey stick curve, which means only a couple of games make most money, which of course is true, and we know that. So when you hear, oh, the games market is brutal and most games don't make money, it is true, but there's a caveat, and that's the caveat is what I want to talk about, right? So let's look at VG Insights. So VG Insights is another one, and you can, let's see, where did it go? Steam market data, yeah, I believe it's this one. Where did Steam go? Oh, sorry. I haven't used these in a while. There you go. So again, same thing is telling you, it's sort of showing you a similar graph, right? A bit different, but mostly when you combine the two, you're able to get a pretty good idea of the overall numbers, right? I tend to use VGI because it's far broader for the actual numbers, but if I'm demonstrating, usually I use Gamedev because it's easier to visually show people. But again, like top 5%, top quartile, average, median, bottom quartile, $6. So it looks like people are not going to be able to make a lot of money out of this. So here's the part, right? Here's the thing. Ideally, your game that you're making, you want it to be in that gray region over there, 3.9%. So your job, in a sense, if you're thinking like me, like a computer scientist, I come from an engineering background, right? So everything is like a gradient descent or energy minimization or something problem, right? Like how do you maximize this while minimizing the energy that you have? So again, let's look at it from a very simple perspective. So if I were to go and I were to try to change the genres, just to see what genre makes most sense, okay? So if I click action, and it's going to take, I think, a second to move. I hope the internet is there. Okay, there you go. So you can see that the numbers, they update. So that pie graph sort of updates as I click and unclick these things, right? If I do adventure, you'll see that it went slightly higher. So if your game is not just, if you know that your game is an adventure game, then there's a slightly higher chance that it will be successful. So you click adventure, and I want you to notice this, right? So if I uncheck that, right, that number should bump up. I think it's just taking a bit of time to update, but there you go. So as you click these, you begin to see how many total games are available on Steam which match the filters, and that's a very, very important metric for you to keep in mind, because that's your competition, right? So your competition in reality, when people show you these sobering numbers, is not all of those games. So that actually is giving you a false sense of despair, right? If you go with casual, obviously that number is going to go even worse, right? Because casual games don't make too much money either. If you go free to play, obviously. So I'm not seeing the particular genre we ended up with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the subgenre. So first of all, this is amazing just even looking at it, because it says, whoa, I don't know about you guys, but some of these I didn't even know. Like, what is 4x? Like, I remember having to research when I saw 4x. Oh, okay. So watch what happens right here. I click 4x, and let's hope this up there. Do you see that? Suddenly, now your chances went from a measly 3.9% to 17.6%. Okay? Yes?
I also noticed that the number of games matching filtered drastically went down too.
Exactly.
You got less data points, the certainty of that also gets better.
No, it does, for sure. But that's what you want. You want a lower number because it tells you that there is a lower competition. And this is the rule of thumb, I was going to get into that, right? The thing is, what we are seeing is that people are, I'll talk about that a bit later, but like, my rule of thumb is, if you are in and this is a rule of thumb, right? If you're making a game that has the game match, the filters, the general filters, we'll talk about more detailed filters later. Anywhere between 100, less than 100, and now you're like, I don't even know if this is just a fluke or something, but 100, right? Up to 500. If it's more than 500, you're probably getting into a territory where that game is going to be difficult to, compete with, because there's a lot of games there. If it's less than 100, as you said, there's too few games and you don't know the data is going to be skewed too much. So from my experience, again, playing with these numbers a lot, and what you can do in order to figure out whether this makes sense or not, because you can see that there's 318, which is, for me, it's a good sweet spot, right? You can then actually go to see games, to actually see the games that are in that filter. And that gives you very good information on the actual numbers, right? Now, of course, right? You saw Sid Meier's there for a minute. You're seeing Cyberpunk over there, which definitely is not 4x. I don't know why it's there. So yeah, so you can see and you can filter these things out. But I haven't added the filters. By the time you start adding filters, the list that you will get a sense of, yes, this list represents the kind of games that I want to make, and it gives you a very, very good, I don't know anything about 4x games, by the way. So, whether this list makes sense or not, I do not know, and I don't think it makes sense. So let's go back, right? So what we did was then we started, again, going back to those number sheets. We started off with, okay, so here's what we did. Let's go back to Gamedev, right? So what we did was, we went to subgenres and we said, what about if we try to make, let me go back to the stats. And let's say we go with, well, we have an open world game. Let's see what it says, right? And so that's a great jump, right? That's a 23.1%. The games are still, there's quite a lot of games in there, so it's like 2,200. So your sample size is pretty big as well. But this data is not correct either, so we're going to further refine it, right? It's correct, but it's not quite what we're looking for. So then what I do is I look for survival, right? And again, this is after us doing quite a bit. So as you can see, we're almost at 25%. So pretty good, pretty good. If you make an open world survival craft game, now remember that this was done a year and a half ago, where this was far more virgin territory. For the last, I think 6 months, every day there's a new survival game coming out. So it's very different today than what it was before. I believe this number was much higher, okay? Problem is this data is skewed. Still, why is this data skewed? Because it includes, if you look at the list of the actual games, right? If you go there and you look at the game, so you will see that, there you go. So just by looking at this, it looks decent. Like the numbers, the games that it's showing are actually action survival. They are survival games. They are open world, some of them open world, some of them maybe not. But overall, if I see this, I'm like, yeah, the usual suspects are there. So this looks decent. So there's Valheim, there's Raft, Daisy, No Man's Sky, Palworld, Ark Survival, Rust, all of those games. Problem with this though is twofold. One is that you see Ark Survival and you see a couple of other games that are for us as a company are too big. Like, that's not who we're competing with, right? We're not competing with another art survival. In fact, when we are asked, we say that we are probably competing with either Valheim or with Green Hell. That's probably in terms of the scope. We're trying to be, let's say, so Valheim is all procedural, low fidelity graphics, but very procedural. We don't want to do procedural, but we have high fidelity graphics instead. So there's a give and take, right? And then Green Hell. So what you do is that you go back to this, and here's a very interesting thing that you can do, right? So there's a publisher class, right? So what you could do is you could say either AA, indie, or hobbyist. Let's include those, right? And then let's look at the game. So as you can see, it's gotten rid of art survival as usual. So that's right. And these do look like the sort of game. Stalker is somewhere in between. It is AA technically, so I think it's fine. It's there. Kenshi is there. Most of those games are there. So let's see. Let's look at the stats, right? So if we look at the stats, it's going to take a second to update. 22. Yeah. So indie hobby is still a very, very reasonable number. But that is still, first of all, it's good. It's good. But it still is not quite where we are. Because our company, we have a good mix of experienced people and fresh people coming in who are learning. So we couple very senior people with the youngsters to give them an opportunity to learn and to grow. But we're not like AA in the traditional sense, like we're not, it's self-funded, yes.
Does this data show development costs?
This is just revenue.
Yeah, revenue going out for what the game brings.
Yeah.
Does it show you how much it costs to actually make the games?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know.
It was on the previous one. There was a column for a cost.
Oh, there is? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's been a very long while since I had to look at these numbers. But yeah, okay. But as I said, if you go into this, it explains exactly how they got all these numbers. So it's pretty detailed. But I wouldn't be surprised that the dev cost should be there because how else, what else is there? So most of the time it should be there. But in fact, now that I think about it, it is there because we use that in order to figure out how much money you would have to make in order to be successful, and we're looking at this. So yeah, so I think that it does. So it's not pure profits. I think the simplest calculation of cost is basically Steam's 30% cut, right? But I think other than that, I don't recall exactly. That's a great question. So again, we as a company were like, okay, we're a smaller company, so where are we in this? And this is again really interesting. So I want you to look at this, right? So the average price is 13. The median revenue is this, total revenue is this. I mean, these numbers are good. 412, so it's under the 500 ballpark. It's above the 100. So for me, it's a good place to be competing, right? And then when I look at the games, I see that they're good. So how can we improve this? Is by going to the minimum price. And this gets very interesting. If I say, well, I just want, I'm not making a free-to-play game. I'm not making a $5 game. I'm not making a mobile game, right? So my game, my company, it's a premium game. So let's say I put 9, which is not premium, but I'm just to show you. And as you can see, this goes up to 33%, right? So it means that if you are making a game, I'm not saying you should price it and this will go up, right? That's the wrong way to look at it. What I'm saying is if you believe your game is worth at least 9.9, is worth at least, like if you look at other games that cost that much, then the chances of you succeeding jump dramatically, right? And if you then go all the way up to 19.9, right? Let's see. Do you see that? Right? So, and then again, games matching filters under 9, right? So still above that 100 mark. So 100 games, around 100 games, which cost about 19.9, and then your chances of success are over 50%. Boom. That's what we're looking for. So we don't want it to be an entirely coin toss. So it's over 50. But of course, I'm being a bit pessimistic. Like that's not the only metric of success. This is pretty reasonable too, right? I mean, it's not great, but if you made like 500K or something, it's still not bad, right? So again, to recap, I think that what we tend to do is we tend to get swayed when we are doing market research by data that is in aggregate. And then we look at that aggregate data and then we're like, oh yeah, I'm never going to be able to make a successful game. So what I'm suggesting here is that if you do want to make a game, as I said, we originally wanted to make a narrative game. Now, again, if you're saying, and I've done this in the past, right? Like, hey, I want to make an XYZ game, and somebody says, you're crazy, you're never going to make money, and I'm like, sure, that's okay, right? And that's totally fine. But if the idea is that you want to actually set up a company, and you want to hire people, you're going to put money in, and you want to make a revenue, it is extremely important to look at the type of games that are actually selling, and to understand the genre, right? And this is amazing. As I said, I didn't choose any of the main genres. In a sense, I did that on purpose because we didn't want to go with, here's a standard game, we're going to make another one, because then games matching filters will explode. And so you're not going to be able to compete with those games. But if you look at this, you're a $19 game. Ours is higher, actually. Our game is trying to remember how much we're aiming for. I think it was like $29.99. So again, based on how much it cost us to make the game, again, those numbers look a bit better. And even the you know, not only does this get bigger, but specifically that one disproportionately gets smaller rather than these ones. So that means overall you're skewed towards success. Yeah.
Two questions for you. So I noticed on the list of games in this category and others, you have a lot of games in the 2010s that were released. So like time on market, how do you factor into that?
That's great. Thank you for reminding me. Yes.
My second question is the price in this segment, like price appreciation is pretty significant, especially in this genre.
Yeah.
So how do you factor in, like, a lot of those games launched at 55 and now they're at 20.
Yeah.
So how does that factor in your?
They average it out.
Yeah.
They do. So this is the average price. So if something originally started off at 80 and then it's been
I see that it's average, but how do you peg your price?
Oh, so right now I'm not talking about what my price should be. I'm just saying this is what the market is telling you. Like that's a whole another discussion, right? Or what the price, and we haven't even figured out exactly what the price is, right? This is just telling you if your price is roughly that, this is roughly, and you're right. Like this is not this is an average number, absolutely, right? What we do in terms of figuring out the price is, once we filtered it, we look at those games and then we do a more detailed analysis of those games. So we looked at Valheim, we looked at its early access price, we looked at how much it was priced after. That changes every day, right? So literally until you release, you don't know. Silksong, I don't know if anybody, controversy over Silksong's pricing, I don't know if anybody, it was like, you're selling for too cheap. How is that even a problem, right? Like, other devs were miffed that Silksong should have been priced higher because if they price it lower, then it makes it harder for other people to price their games because people are going to compare it to Silksong. Which, in my opinion, is not true because Silksong is Silksong. It's a very different game which has a huge following. If your game is anything like Silksong, you don't have to worry about anything. So I think nobody's going to compare your game's price to GTA 6 or Silksong or anything like that, from my experience. Your game is your own game. Look at other games which are similar, with a similar sort of clout following, which is why, so when we went to investors, for example, they didn't want to see Green Hell. They didn't want to see Valheim. They wanted to see Ark, and they wanted to see Power World, and they didn't want to, but that's not the reality. Yes, of course, for investment purposes, I hate to say this, but yes, you know, like, what was that movie? Wolf of Wall Street? Those are rookie numbers, you better jack them up, right? So like, so unfortunately you sort of have to do that when you're talking to investors and show them what the best possible scenario is. Me being an engineer, I feel very uncomfortable with that, so I always look at what the most reasonable scenario is. So in our case, it's like, yeah, Green Hell is probably where we are with a smaller sort of, you know, very fan following. And so yeah, to answer your question, that's where we look at when we look at the pricing, and of course it also includes our cost of development as well. Yes?
These are a lot nicer than the beginning aggregate numbers.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what's on the opposite side of that. What are the genres and other factors that are bringing it down?
Yeah, great question. I'll get to that just in a second. Yes.
To be clear, you're talking about using a lot of this specifically to understand the market for the game that you want to make,
Correct.
not using these kinds of things to try to steer the product that you actually want to make. Like, that's not what you're suggesting of like, I want to start a studio,
Yeah.
let me look at these numbers to figure out what kind of game I should make.
Yeah.
You should ideally maybe already have that, and you're using this to understand the market for that product that you want to make, and not.
It was the former. So in our case, it was we had an idea of what we wanted to make, but having been bitten in the past, like having run companies and having worked at indies, and I want this to sort of support that idea. It was more about I'm willing to chuck away what's in my head if the data doesn't support what's in my head, and it didn't. So like
how do you avoid any sort of trend chasing or the kind of like?
So for me, it's that game matching filters I'm talking about. So trend chasing would be huge. You're talking about a trend where everybody's making that type of game, and you're trying not to by choosing your filters so that you have a smaller sample. So you don't want it to be above 500. Again, rule of thumb, right? And just my own, not a particular, just from experience. And you don't want it to be less than 100, because if it's less than 100, there's a good chance it's so niche and it's so small that those numbers they just work for that particular thing, and then it won't work in general. That's how I did it. But again, a lot of this is just based on my experience rather than this is how you should do it. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. So to come back to that question that you were asking about the genre, that was actually, I believe this didn't exist back then. I believe this didn't exist. Could be wrong. But this is super cool. And then somebody asked about the release date, so I'm going to get to that too. So this is a neat little thing that I believe didn't exist back then, or maybe I was just being blind. But like this just makes it so much simpler, right? So you can actually see the genre that you're talking about. So you can see RPG has 19,000 games, simulation has this many, adventure has this. There's another really, really cool graph here. I'm trying to remember if that's here or if it's in VG Insights. Let me see if it's there instead of here. But that one was really, really good. Let's see if I can find it. Genre. I believe it was here. This graph over here. Oh, we got it. Super interesting graph, right? This is the trend chasing that you were talking about. So this is how many games were released with that particular genre. So the more it's here, the more it's a trend, or it's like something that's in vogue. Whereas the higher it is, it's like how many it's selling, right? So ideally, you want something that is closer to this side and as high as possible, right? That's the short way of looking at it, which means that it's not super trendy, but still it's making a lot of money, right? So if you look at that, RPG, very, very interesting. To me, very interesting. I was not expecting to see RPG be one of those games that will sell a lot, because I thought every game is almost an RPG. Apparently not. So I'll have to. This was just today I discovered. So I'll have to look at what their definition of RPG is. But if you look at this one, obviously the action games, right? So action games are by far the largest. And if you noticed, when I take action, it almost didn't move the needle at all, because every game is an action game, right? So we try not to do that. And then of course adventure. So action adventure are the big ones, right? So adventure, of course, less games over there. Most games are action. And then this is what I think some of you were asking, but see how puzzle games are like very, very difficult to sell, right? They're very, very low. And then there's a lot of competition, right? So just something to keep in mind, yeah.
Well, and this is also on Steam numbers.
These are Steam numbers.
Not looking at like mobile and free to play.
These are not. So I believe that VG Insights now does have those other ones. I believe there's a tag. So I just recently saw it. They improved a lot from 1.5 years ago. And I'm not sure why this, but they also acquired another company. So yeah, there are those numbers too. But these ones, yes, these are all for Steam, correct. Okay, so again, interesting, right? Like you look at these things, you look at these lifestyle racing sports right around here. Very, very interesting. This whole graph to me was just like very interesting. Another thing that was super interesting to me was, let's go back to the Steam Analytics. And was this one over here? So if you look at before COVID, there was the gross revenue is around 5 billion, right? And then you go to 2022, sorry, 13, right? So 10, there you go. So suddenly doubles within a span of 2 years. And that of course has a lot to do with people were sitting at home, they were playing more games, and then Microsoft bought a couple of studios and started putting a lot of money into it. And of course, I'm not saying 2025 is going to be any less, that all just means 2025 isn't peak yet. So over Christmas, you're going to see a lot of people buy stuff too, so this is probably going to go up. But very interesting to see this trend over here. So to go back to the release things, I forgot to add that as well. So one of the things that we did, I believe, open world, and then we went to, as I said, survival. And then one of the things we did was to filter this out. So I believe we had filtered it out to only show last 3 years or so. So that we weren't looking at skewed numbers from games like Valheim, which has been in early access for what, 5 years, I think? I'm not sure, don't hold me to that. Or like Minecraft. Minecraft is a survival game, right? And it's gonna, jack their numbers up. So we did that too, and it brings it back from whatever 61% to like a smaller number. But again, these are all the different kinds of numbers that you can play with in order to get a better sense of where your market is and how you should be, what type of game you should be making. Now, to answer a question, a very important one is, what about if you already have a game? How do you guide that game with these numbers? I'm going to get to that now. Because that was actually one of the things that we sort of learned, right? So we chose survival. That was the genre, so open world survival. So now the second question, and I'm going to keep this one brief because as I said, my focus was primarily on the stats, right? So for us, we didn't want to compete with everybody else. So we specifically chose the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa as the identity. Now, of course, if you make a game based on our experience that is not just yet another high fantasy medieval England or Nordic, then there's a chance that people like it because it looks different, right? So this naturally appeals to other people too. But there's a very big market out there that it's super interesting that people are completely missing. It's like hidden in plain sight. It's an $8 billion market out there, right? So expected gamers across MENA by 2030, 176 million plus. And so like the numbers are very, very good. I remember when we, again, EA was not bought by Saudi at that time, right? So this is like 18 months before that. And we saw something happening in that region. I don't have all those numbers that we looked at, but we looked at the world gaming thing and we're like, okay, looks like that region is going to grow pretty quickly. So it was a good gamble. We luckily are at that stage where, because we're marketing to this, we're getting reached out by different companies now, especially with the EA acquisition. People from actually the Ministry of Saudi reached out to us because we're the only game out there that is in the desktop console level. All the other games are mobile games, right? So we knew that we didn't want to make a mobile game. We knew we didn't want to make a casual game. We knew we didn't want to try to compete with. It is super interesting. When we initially pitched, I pitched our game to this company called, I'm trying to remember its name. The company that basically does the funding for most of these Saudi games and stuff. They're a company based here, I believe, but they do it worldwide, but the Saudi government has partnered with them. And they looked at our game and said, you know, you guys, I mean, this is great, but you guys are too small. We're looking at like bigger. I'm thinking, which big company are you talking about in Saudi? You know, remember, this is like a year and a half ago. So it doesn't exist. And I can't remember if I said it to his face or the thought just crossed my mind, but I distinctly remember this thought that I was like, who are you trying to fund and acquire? EA? It was literally, that was what was in my mind at the time. And so when they did acquire, I was like, oh, duh, it was EA, right? So because the numbers they showed me, I think there were like probably 3 companies at the time that could match those numbers. It's like, I don't know anybody who has IP like that. The other one that I knew, Activision Blizzard, has already been bought by Microsoft, so EA, and it turned out I was right. So we did a lot of market research into this. We looked at it, and recently, very recently, we talked to a company that we met at GDC, and they were like, so once you set up a game studio and you advertise your game, not advertise, even just post it on LinkedIn, you will get a lot of people who will come to you and say, we're going to market your game for you, right? If your game is one of the well-known genres, then that's fine. I think it's not even about genres. It's about the market, the audience. And they would come to us and say, well, here's how you can market this game. And this is an important lesson for us, right? So we paid like a couple of $1,000 to several different companies, and nothing came out of it. When I say nothing came out of it, I literally mean nothing came out of it. Like the marketing that we did, the wish list, not wish list at the time, the actual follows and likes that we were getting were the same organic versus after hiring those companies, right? And it occurred to us why. It's because they don't understand that market. It's a completely different market. The playbook that they have assumes that you're talking about the United States or Europe. It assumes you're talking about a type of person who has a certain type of purchasing patterns. So, like for example, all the regular things that we had heard about, get them to wish list, this, Saudis never wish list. They just buy the game. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to see any wish list at all, and then boom, they're going to buy it. But that's just Saudi. And then it was so interesting as we started looking at these different things. So for example, Malaysia and Indonesia, very similar countries, right? In terms of culture, even language, very close. And yet they could not be different enough when it comes to marketing. So different. So Indonesians are amazing when it comes to feedback, when it comes to the wish listing, all of that. Purchases, translation, not sure. Demo playing, not sure. Malaysians exact opposite, right? They're not going to engage. You won't see them. And then suddenly you have like 20 play wish lists in an hour, and you suddenly see 100 downloads, and you're like, where did that come from, Malaysia? Okay, what did I do, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the thing that we learned was that there's a new playbook that you have to sort of invent. And a lot of these companies that will reach out to you to say, we want to market your game for you, are going to have, here's what they'll tell you. These are the marketing beats. We need to get it into, this. We need to do a big launch. We need to get a trailer out. We have to do this. And the best learning I had was from a video by someone at GDC who said all of that is nonsense. And then he said, when it comes to indie games, you don't have a big launch. You don't have, hey, I'm not going to post this again because people have seen it. You have so little visibility that you could post 10 times a day and maybe one person will see a particular, and this is so true. So in our case, when we started getting Instagram followers and TikTok and wishlist, we still, to this day, 90% of the people who discover our stuff are people who have not already engaged with it. So we're reaching new audiences every single day. So again, a very different playbook in terms of how you do marketing. So some of those things, obviously, they become standard by now. They're so used to the demographics that they're like, this is how you should do it. So that puts us in a very good position, because that means we sort of are writing the playbook for the Middle Eastern region. And that's why a couple of companies have reached out to us, like, okay, how did you find success there? And what did you do? So we talked to this company that does AI-based analytics, just for the fun of it. And they sort of came up with these numbers which tallied with ours, which is great, right? So they're tallying with ours, they're telling us what we sort of knew, but I really loved how they framed it though. They framed it much better than us. So like a multi-billion-dollar market, hiding in plain sight. Love that. Right? I'm sure investors would gobble it up. We haven't given this to investors now because we're near early access, but it is a very good way to put it, right? So we are first in terms of market position. It has 80 million plus retail gamers, 88 billion in terms of market value. And then here's what we've been saying. So when we marketed it, the way we marketed it was what we learned, as I said, after 6 months of trying out different marketing companies, we just gathered a small team and said, you know what, we're going to try to do it our own. And so we started with, of course, revamping the trailer, but then also segregating these countries, MENA, into individual countries rather than one large block. And we started taking these ads, and we started doing paid marketing for the first time, ads, and we went to, we localized into each of the languages of those particular countries. Because those people will not just go and wish list or this or that. They, what we learned, is care more about you. Are you being authentic to them? When you speak to them, do you really represent them? Because what we are saying is this. We're saying the audience needs to see their own stories, heroes, and mythologies represented with depth, accuracy, and profound, right? Fair respect. Because if you see games like Assassin's Creed, I mean, they're good, right? They're good games, but they're not history lessons. They're full of holes, and frankly, I haven't felt when I play like Assassin's Creed, like, oh yeah, that represents, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Like, the way that, even Prince of Persia, I don't know if you've seen the latest one, but I'm like,
Yeah.
It's a good game, nothing wrong with that, but like, I couldn't, I mean, I live, Pakistan is very near to Persia, I have a lot of Persian friends, I mean, none of them look like that character in the game, right? So it's very strange to see that. And then the games that we do have from that region are either not made authentically by people from the region, or if they are, then they're lower quality games which are mobile games and stuff. So we wanted to create this feeling in these people that, hey, we're one of you, right? And we need you to support that. We need you to understand that we're trying to tell your stories. We're not trying to be another AAA, we're not trying to be another EA, we're not, a bot company or anything. And we did go to Saudi, we did go to these countries, and we do plan to set up offices there as well. But then that messaging, when we started translating it and when we started to localize it and have humans in it, that was where it suddenly started making a difference. So we started getting like 100 follows just on Instagram alone per day. We started getting, these 5,000 views, then 10,000, then 100,000, and now in the last 30 days we have about 600,000 or 700,000 views on Instagram alone, right? And most of them are coming from those particular regions, right? So we just very recently started it, so it's building, but we can see the momentum build, right? There are a couple of things that we need to be very careful about when we talk about these new regions. I think the Silk Song Chinese translation controversy, I think most people are aware of it. So when we say, this is how basically we were pitching the company, right? So we're saying that people are tired of playing the same genres, and okay, so what we learned, this was super interesting. This was a super interesting learning. So we had looked at the market, and we looked at the game, but we hadn't looked at the overlap between the two. it sounds so logical, and yet it's something that we miss, right? So what I mean to say is, yeah, open world survival, amazing, awesome, a lot of people play it. MENA is the region we want to target. But how many people in MENA play open world survival? That is a thing that we didn't look at. And then it's also something that and that goes back to the question you were asking, like, how do you pivot now? So that's what I want to talk about. Like, what we learned was, and this we learned, unfortunately, pretty late in the game, where we were pitching it as an open world survival game, and blah, blah, blah. And then when we go to these different conferences that are local to those people, like there are these Arab conferences, Muslim conferences, we go there. There's lots of people interested in that, but the very first question they're thinking about is, what's the story, where's the action, those sort of things, right? So, and then the other thing is, initially we said, oh, we're targeting Gen Z. And then when we look at it, like the average age of people who are playing Arabian is a bit higher as well. So that was, as I said, a learning experience for us. So we've changed the messaging, and interestingly, because we already had combat in the game, so one of the things that we've been doing is that we have been play testing the game from day one with actual play testers. So when we would go to GDC, we have a Discord, we'd have them come and, these are survival players from our regions, or at least people who understand those regions, and they play the game, they give us feedback. And of course we have general people too, but they would always give us feedback that we had been hearing, right? Like, where's the action? And we'd say, no, it's a survival game, you're playing it wrong. You're not playing it wrong. Your game is for everybody, right? Ultimately, but who is it that you want to attract, right? If we want to attract the people from the MENA region, and that's the type of game that they play most, well then that's what your game has to be. And it's not once, it's not twice, we kept hearing it over and over again. Over time, we started adding more action. So we had hardcore a lot, but we started adding more action. So by the time we sort of realized, like really woke up and realized the mistake, we had course corrected quite a bit already. So the numbers don't necessarily initially tell us where to go, but then it's the feedback and it's the reality of the numbers that are live. So for example, as I said, when we look at the Instagram views, we see a lot of people constantly saying, hey, could you put this in it, could you put that in it? And it's like different regions have their own preferences, and that's what we learned from. So luckily we didn't have to change the core pillar. We now, instead of saying open world survival craft, we say it's an action survival game, which is probably more realistic anyway. And then we pivoted slightly. And again, initially we were going more with the core players who were completionists because that's survival, and now we're slowly moving away from that too. But very carefully, because once you've invested so much time, money, and effort into that initial thing, you have to be careful not to upset the expectations of the people who are already wish listing or who are already there. So we do have a Discord community where we ask people as well. And then we're constantly like, okay, here's the feature, what do you think, what should we add, and so on and so forth. So overall, our experience has been pretty positive with learning from what the audiences want from us, and then what we should be delivering. This has a very interesting side effect benefit that I haven't seen anyone openly mention. But because we hit a nerve with people about representation, and we mean it, right? It's not just like, oh, let me do this so we earn more money. No, because we actually feel it, right? It hit a nerve with a lot of people, very senior people, who started to just reach out and say, hey, I'd love to volunteer. Just like, what do you need help? We know you're a small company. So we had a community manager from Riot Games basically join us recently as a volunteer, and she's doing community management, right? Which is amazing. We didn't have that leverage, because otherwise we'd have to hire somebody. We had somebody from Atari reach out, right? Who helped us with some of the overall messaging that we had. And we had people reach out from different companies, right? So I'm actually at the end, interestingly, of my talk, but what I wanted to talk about quickly, which I already did talk about, was the marketing. So the challenge is that you cannot do that if you don't have any ties to that at all, right? Without coming across as just cash grab. So you have to have something there. Because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to be a well-read tourist, right? And this is the problem that I was talking about when it comes to Assassin's Creed and those games. They're great, right? They're very well researched, but they lack the reality of the lived experiences that you need. So I'll sort of end-ish on this little anecdote as I finish this, but when we initially started, I remember that the very first region is based on my own home village in Pakistan. So I went there and scanned it, everything. I remember that initially when we tried to get the artists to draw it, they tried and tried and tried and didn't work. So I still remember my artists were frustrated because they were like, Sajid, you spent 3 months on a single wall. I'm not kidding, a wall. Because my theory was, if I look at that wall, it's side by side, and I can feel like, oh, this is how it feels like when I'm walking in my village, right? Then everything else will fall into place. And it wasn't working because they were looking at references online. It doesn't work. So we had to go there and we had to actually scan, because even pictures were not doing justice, because you're just looking at it from one angle. We brought all the research possible, it didn't work, until we did actual scans and videos. And a lot of the artists, we took them there, right? The ones who were already in Pakistan. And they saw it firsthand. Then we got that with the market. And it was almost like a jigsaw piece, you know, just going into place. That wall became the foundation of the whole world. And then that just very quickly fell into place. It took us the next 15 days to create the entire village because that was the foundation. Now you have walls, now you can create houses, and now you can create everything. So building trust is extremely important. So the plan that we have is to have cultural consultation. We are mostly from those regions, but we do consult as well. We do deep localization, which we've already started. Find their digital centers, that's the one that we're still working on. Where do they congregate? Where's their town hall, right? We know because we do it, but it's not digital. So how do you find the digital alternative? Champion local voices, build local community. Again, these are the sort of things that we're working on. This is our roadmap. And yeah, so we've partnered with cultural consultants from Saudi. Store pages have been converted into Arabic. Of course, when I use the word Arabic, I don't necessarily mean just Arabic. We've localized it to Russian, we've localized it to Chinese as well, not using AI, using a proper localization people. So the community engagement overall press has been pretty good. So as you can see the feedback, this was some early feedback. People are comparing it to Assassin's Creed and stuff. But this is the one that I really enjoy because you can see that these are people from the community and they're championing it. So these are not even the local things, but this feedback is like, is very close to our heart because these are people who are what we said originally. We want them to feel authentically excited that somebody worked with. So as I said, what we learned was that the target age group is actually 25 to 34, not what we thought it was. Interestingly, the most effective we found was Indonesia, Malaysia, United States from wishlist perspective. Follower growth, Pakistan at the highest, maybe because founder I'm originally from Pakistan. Demo downloads also. So it's very interesting. There's a whole bunch of learning that we did in here, but I just wanted to, before we haven't been able to summarize it properly yet, so I don't have that. But these are just the basic key insights to people. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, we'll be open to those.
Quick one, then one longer one. The quick one is, do you have the title for the GDP talk about the fact that it needs to be the market different than?
Yeah, I have it somewhere. I will try to find it because that one was very, very good. It's not your typical one. Like when you look at GDC Talk, you usually find why investors hate your game or things like that, which are okay. But that one was very level-headed. Like I could relate to it a lot. If I find it, I'll probably share it with Ryan, and then he can share it with the group.
And then the other question is, I noticed a few times during the talk, you talked about things that the data said that had changed over time.
Yeah.
Considering just how long it takes to make a game. I'm curious where, there's a lot of data that you can use in order to budget cost versus revenue.
Right.
But do you have any insights from data or otherwise for budgeting time? And, knowing what deadlines you need to hit by, especially with the fact, have you noticed any trends where the data seems to have almost an expiration date after a certain period in the future?
That's a really good question. I haven't thought about it that way. The main challenge with data is it's always up to that date, right? So you can sort of extrapolate into the future, but it's always reviewable, right? Like survival games, like I think somebody else was saying, anything that is moderately successful, it's going to become a trend. And all of what your data had said up to that point is going to be null and void. So there's a reason why in software development, agile methodology has become so common, right? Because it allows you to pivot. So pivoting is the name of the game, and it's interesting because I come from a traditional software engineering background, right? And we used to pivot. And games are no different. Originally you think, well, why would you pivot on a game? Well, this is why, right? So games are also pretty much the same. And we did pivot, as I said, right? But that is more based on the different source, that was less based on the Gamedev and VT Insights data. It was more on live feedback from actual players on the ground. So there's aggregate data and there's on the ground data. And we did pivot, but very carefully and based on actual people. Now, it's interesting you mentioned time. That is actually a very important point. Like, the only reason we were able to execute and do what we did was because we followed deadlines very rigorously. And again, based on my experience with leading teams engineering-wise, we're able to really focus on what needs to be focused on and just get that done rather than get sidetracked. So just to give you an example, our company was formed, I believe, in September. November, we started hiring our first people. By March, in GDC, we already had a demo. So that's an extremely accelerated timeline. But again, that's because we were able to couple some senior people like myself who knew the engine inside out, who had run into all of these problems, technical problems, were able to leverage other people's effort. But we knew, and I had put these literally in stone. If we don't hit GDC, if we don't hit PAX, PAX not necessarily at the time, there were a couple of others, we won't have a company. Those were literally my words to the people, employees. If we don't hit these, we will not have a company. It was as simple as that. Any other questions? Yes.
So you might go into the marketing or audience analytics to build up the pitch for investor or publisher. Did you find more success with one of those groups between investors or publishers?
Oh yeah, definitely publishers. So investors, the challenge was investors from the MENA region didn't understand gaming as much, and so they're looking for safe bets like EA, right? So they're not going to invest, or weren't at that time. Now they are. Now they're reaching out to me like, hey, we're interested in, we want you to join. They have an incubation and stuff like that. Now it's different, but back then they weren't. And then when you are trying to find investors here, the problem is they don't understand that much. So it was a problem because you're like, okay, we're going to make a lot of money because Saudis are going to buy it, and they're like, with publishers it was much easier. However, with publishers it was easier once we had the demo, and once they actually could see the demo, they could play it. And then two things, it's unfortunate, but it's true. It's more about who you know than what you know. So when it comes to publishers, if you have a direct line, luckily I'd worked at Microsoft, I had worked with Epic, so there were people that I knew. And then we went to PAX, and for example, Vitalik, we met them in person, and the person, luckily, who makes decisions about these was right there by chance. So he just came and played our game, and I'm like, oh, this is great, right? So Epic Games was also very interested. It's just that the timing didn't work out with them because we wanted to do early access now, and they're like, no, we want you to release a game for our beat, as I said. So for indie games, beats don't really work. So I'll take, I guess, one last question, or maybe two, depending on how big the question is. If we have any questions.
Yeah, quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in your talk, you said you had numbers, I didn't quite catch it, but you said you had numbers from Xbox, Microsoft, or...
No. Right. So when I used to work at Microsoft, in the DirectX team, what I said was that we, as Microsoft, had a lot of numbers. So I know that we have numbers. I just don't know if those numbers they weren't public at that time, for sure. But I was saying that this software, this subscription, VG Insights, they now have a section saying Xbox and PlayStation. So I was commenting and saying, I don't know how they got the numbers. Either they licensed it from Microsoft or they're guessing, but I don't know. But it's something worth checking.
Right, because the second part, which is, trying to see, analyze data between Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox.
Yeah. So usually, so as I said, we haven't been able to, because when I started the company, that's my access to data that I wasn't allowed to, so I don't have the Xbox numbers. But at that time, the Xbox and the PlayStation numbers were not out. But generally speaking, without knowing anything, the consoles make more money in terms of, because it's so hard to get in. There's a program for dev kits and you have to be approved and all of that. That generally if you make a game for console, there's not a lot of competition for that game on the console. So and it also gets featured and stuff like that. So generally, if I remember correctly, Microsoft also has a Game Pass, by the way. So and Microsoft has like a couple of different and Epic Game Store, by the way, too, where if you're releasing a game and you can show that you're releasing on Xbox or Microsoft Windows Store concurrently with another competitor, they will reduce the percentage cut significantly. I think Epic does that too. I believe that usually it's like, I don't know what, then it becomes 12, and then if you do concurrent, it becomes lower. So it's certainly beneficial. A lot of people do rely on the console port to make most of their money if it's not making a lot of money on Steam. This is all anecdotal. I don't know.